Step away from the checkpoint. That man is a threat. The words exploded across Terminal C just after 6:40 on a cool Monday morning at Jefferson International Airport, cutting through the usual rhythm of rolling suitcases, boarding announcements, and quiet conversations. Heads turned instantly. Travelers froze in place. Coffee cups paused halfway to waiting lips. Every eye landed on the man standing calmly beneath the blue glow of the executive security lane. Marcus Ellison never flinched. At 45 years old, he stood 6 feet 2 inches tall, dressed in dark jeans, polished brown boots, and a simple black polo beneath a lightweight charcoal jacket. No luxury watch gleamed from his wrist. No designer luggage announced wealth. Beside him rested nothing more than a modest black carry-on and a slim leather briefcase that looked as ordinary as the thousands moving through the terminal every morning. Security Supervisor Ethan Walker stepped forward with unmistakable confidence, his voice louder than necessary, determined to make an example out of the quiet traveler in front of him. "Don't move another inch," Ethan ordered. "Until we verify exactly who you are, you're not going anywhere." Marcus slowly raised his eyes toward the supervisor, not with fear, not with anger, but with the kind of calm that often unsettled people far more than shouting ever could. Around them, the TSA line stretched another 100 feet as passengers whispered among themselves, trying to understand why one man had suddenly become the center of attention. Ethan pointed toward Marcus' briefcase. "Set it down." Slowly. Marcus complied without argument. "Now step away." Again, Marcus obeyed. There was something almost unsettling about how composed he remained. No defensive gestures. No raised voice. No desperate explanations. Just steady breathing and patient silence. Ethan interpreted that silence as weakness. "I knew something was off the second you walked into my lane," he declared loudly enough for dozens of strangers to hear. People don't just wander into executive security looking like this. Several nearby passengers exchanged uncomfortable glances. One older woman frowned but remained silent. A businessman wearing an expensive navy suit looked briefly toward Marcus before quietly continuing through another screening lane without interruption. The contrast was impossible to ignore. Marcus watched him disappear before calmly saying only 4 words. "Run my full name." Ethan laughed under his breath. "That's not how this works." Marcus nodded once, as though he'd expected exactly that answer. The airport continued moving around them, yet inside the security checkpoint, time seemed to slow. The electronic boarding screens kept changing. Families hurried toward their gates. Flight attendants rolled matching luggage across polished floors. But inside that small circle surrounding Marcus Ellison, every second felt heavier than the last. Nobody recognized him. Nobody recognized the face that had appeared on the cover of business magazines years earlier. Nobody connected the ordinary traveler with the executive responsible for transforming one of America's fastest-growing aviation companies. That anonymity had been intentional. Marcus had spent years making unannounced visits to airports across the country because reports kept landing on his desk describing passengers who claimed they had been judged long before anyone checked their boarding passes. He wanted facts instead of filtered reports. He wanted to see the culture with his own eyes. He wanted the truth before another board meeting filled with polished presentations and carefully chosen statistics. This morning was never supposed to become public. It was supposed to be another quiet observation, another ordinary inspection. Instead, it had become something else entirely. Ethan folded his arms across his chest and took another step closer. "I said you're a threat until proven otherwise." The sentence echoed through the checkpoint with chilling certainty. Marcus looked directly into Ethan's eyes and answered in the same measured tone he had used throughout his entire career. "Interesting choice of words." Ethan smirked. "You'll have plenty of time to explain yourself." Marcus simply nodded again, almost sympathetically. Neither man noticed that several travelers had already begun recording from a distance, nor did they notice a young security officer named Olivia Carter quietly staring at the computer monitor beside her station, her expression changing ever so slightly after seeing something unexpected appear on the internal system. Outside the massive glass walls of the terminal, far beyond anyone's attention, a sleek black SUV turned off the airport access road and headed silently toward the executive entrance. Marcus rested both hands loosely at his sides as another security officer approached carrying a gray inspection tray. Without being asked twice, he placed his wallet, phone, keys, and tablet inside with the same quiet precision that had guided billion-dollar negotiations for more than 2 decades. Ethan Walker watched every movement as though expecting some hidden mistake to reveal itself. Instead, he found only patience. "Open the briefcase," Ethan instructed. Marcus complied immediately. Inside sat neatly organized travel documents, a legal pad filled with handwritten notes, a fountain pen, and several printed reports about passenger experience metrics. Ethan flipped through the pages without understanding why anyone would carry research about airport operations during a business trip. "Planning something?" he asked with an unmistakable edge. Marcus answered evenly. "Learning something." Ethan dismissed the response with a scoff. "Sure you are." Nearby, passengers continued filtering through adjacent screening lanes. A white executive wearing an expensive tailored suit smiled politely at another officer, flashed his boarding pass, and walked directly toward the executive lounge without being delayed for even 30 seconds. Marcus watched him disappear behind the frosted glass doors before quietly returning his attention to Ethan. The comparison spoke louder than any accusation. Grace Mitchell, a 37-year-old marketing consultant from Denver waiting only a few yards away, lowered the novel she had been reading. She had witnessed enough business travel over the years to recognize the difference between routine screening and unnecessary humiliation. Slowly, she unlocked her phone and began recording from waist level, careful not to interfere while preserving exactly what unfolded. Several nearby travelers noticed her and quietly exchanged uncertain glances. Nobody wanted confrontation, but nobody could pretend this looked ordinary anymore. Ethan picked up Marcus's boarding pass and examined it longer than necessary. "Executive boarding," he muttered. "Interesting." He turned the document over twice before narrowing his eyes again. "Who paid for this ticket?" Marcus answered without hesitation. "My company." Ethan smiled sarcastically. "Convenient answer." Marcus remained perfectly still. "It happens to be the truthful one." Another officer standing nearby shifted awkwardly but remained silent. Olivia Carter, the youngest member of the morning security team, continued monitoring the internal verification terminal only a few feet away. Marcus's identification had already generated multiple encrypted notifications she had never seen before. Across the top of the screen appeared an unusual authorization banner, followed by a message reading "Executive Security Override." Beneath it flashed another line requesting immediate supervisor confirmation before any additional screening could continue. Olivia blinked twice, convinced she had misread the system. She refreshed the page. The message remained. Her pulse quickened. She quietly stepped toward Ethan. "Supervisor Walker," she began carefully, "the verification system is asking for executive clearance before we proceed." Ethan barely looked at the screen. "Ignore it." Olivia hesitated. "But I have never seen this authorization level before." Ethan waved her away. "Computer glitches happen every day. Finish your assignment." Olivia looked back toward Marcus. He met her eyes for only a second before calmly returning his gaze forward. There was no frustration in his expression, only patience. Somehow that made Olivia even more uneasy. Grace continued recording. Her camera captured every instruction, every response, every growing silence from the surrounding travelers. One elderly veteran quietly whispered to his wife, "The gentleman has done everything they asked." She nodded without taking her eyes off Marcus. Another passenger muttered, "Why does this feel different?" Ethan picked up Marcus's phone and turned it over in his hand. "No luxury case. No expensive accessories. You expect me to believe someone flying executive travels like this?" Marcus answered softly, "Confidence weighs less than appearances." Ethan chuckled. "That sounds rehearsed." Marcus offered the faintest smile. "Experience usually does." The answer drew another wave of quiet whispers from nearby passengers. Olivia returned to the terminal one final time and opened the verification details. This time additional information appeared beneath the authorization request. "Confidential executive arrival. Notify corporate aviation liaison immediately." She felt a knot form in her stomach. This was no ordinary traveler. Whatever was happening had already reached levels far beyond airport security. Olivia took a slow breath and glanced toward the massive terminal windows. Outside, the black sport utility vehicle rolled to a smooth stop near the restricted executive entrance as several airport administrators suddenly straightened their jackets and hurried toward the curb with expressions that suggested someone extraordinarily important had just arrived. The atmosphere inside the executive screening lane grew heavier with every passing second, not because Marcus Ellison resisted a single instruction, but because he complied with every one of them while the suspicion surrounding him only seemed to deepen. Ethan Walker folded Marcus's boarding pass and held it between two fingers as though it had become evidence instead of a perfectly valid travel document. "Stay exactly where you are," he said before turning toward another officer. "I want every item documented before anything goes back to him." Marcus answered with nothing more than a calm nod. The silence frustrated Ethan far more than an argument ever could. "You seem awfully comfortable for someone under investigation," Ethan remarked. Marcus looked directly at him. "I am comfortable telling the truth." Ethan smirked. "Everybody says that." Marcus did not respond. Around them, more travelers slowed their pace, pretending to check departure screens while quietly watching the unusual scene unfold. Grace Mitchell continued recording from a respectful distance. Her camera captured Marcus standing alone while other executive travelers passed through neighboring checkpoints with little more than a glance at their identification. A middle-aged businessman whispered to the woman beside him. "He has not argued once." She quietly answered, "Neither would I if I knew I had done nothing wrong." Ethan opened Marcus's leather briefcase again, carefully lifting each document before placing it back into the case. His eyes settled on a printed report titled Passenger Trust and Operational Culture. He laughed softly. "Interesting reading material." Marcus answered without hesitation, "It is part of my work." Ethan shook his head. "You really expect me to believe that?" Marcus remained composed. "Belief is your choice. Facts are not." The words lingered in the air long after Marcus finished speaking. Olivia Carter watched the exchange while another notification appeared across her monitor. The system had automatically locked the verification process and displayed a new instruction requesting immediate contact with Corporate Aviation Administration. She had never witnessed the software override its own workflow before. She quietly approached Ethan once more. "Supervisor, I really think someone from administration needs to review this authorization." Ethan barely glanced toward her. "I already told you to ignore the computer. I make the decisions here." Olivia hesitated. "But if the system is protecting his identity?" Ethan interrupted sharply. "Enough." Olivia stepped back, her concern growing stronger. Marcus noticed her uncertainty but remained completely silent. His expression never changed. Yet somewhere deep inside, another memory quietly resurfaced. 18 years earlier, he had stood inside another airport wearing his first tailored business suit after closing the biggest contract of his young career. He remembered smiling as he approached the premium security lane, proud that years of hard work had finally earned him the opportunity to travel for important meetings. A supervisor had looked him up and down before saying, "That lane is reserved for business travelers." Marcus had politely shown his ticket. The man barely looked at it before directing him toward a different line nearly an hour long. Marcus never forgot the embarrassment of watching several white travelers arrive after him and reach their gates before he ever cleared security. He had boarded that flight promising himself something simple. If success ever placed him in a position to influence the industry, dignity would become part of the customer experience instead of an optional courtesy. That promise had shaped every major decision of his career. The present returned as Ethan held up Marcus's identification once again. "Tell me something," Ethan said loudly enough for nearby passengers to hear. "Why should anyone believe you belong in the executive section?" Marcus answered quietly. "Because the truth does not depend on appearances." A few people exchanged thoughtful glances. Grace lowered her phone for only a moment before raising it again. The recording had already captured nearly 15 uninterrupted minutes of calm professionalism from Marcus and increasingly aggressive assumptions from the supervisor. Even officers in neighboring lanes had begun watching. Nobody spoke. Nobody interrupted. The tension no longer belonged only to Marcus and Ethan. It had spread across the checkpoint itself. Outside the towering glass walls, the black sport utility vehicle came to a complete stop beneath the executive entrance canopy. Airport administrators hurried toward it with unmistakable urgency as the rear passenger door slowly opened and a distinguished man in a navy suit stepped onto the pavement, his arrival instantly changing the pace of everyone waiting outside. Olivia Carter could no longer convince herself that the warning on her monitor was a software error. She refreshed the verification screen a third time, and instead of disappearing, the authorization expanded into a level of access she had never seen during her 3 years with airport security. Across the top flashed Executive Security Override, followed by another encrypted notification marked Immediate Corporate Liaison Required. Her heartbeat quickened. Training had taught her that unusual system alerts were never to be ignored. Yet Ethan Walker had dismissed every one of them without a second glance. She looked from the glowing monitor to Marcus Ellison, who remained exactly where he had been instructed to stand, his posture relaxed, his expression steady, his patience almost impossible to understand. Olivia stepped closer to Ethan once again, lowering her voice so only he could hear. "Supervisor, I really think we need to pause and call airport administration. This traveler has executive clearance that overrides our checkpoint." Ethan barely looked away from Marcus. "You are letting a computer think for you," he replied. "I am looking at the person standing in front of me." Olivia swallowed carefully. "The system identifies him as someone we are supposed to assist, not delay." Ethan shook his head. "Then the system is wrong." Marcus quietly listened without interrupting. He had spent enough years inside boardrooms to recognize when confidence slowly became arrogance. Around the checkpoint, the atmosphere continued changing. More travelers stopped pretending they were not watching. A father traveling with his teenage daughter whispered, "This has gone on much longer than normal." His daughter nodded. He has been respectful the entire time. Grace Mitchell remained several feet away with her phone still recording. The small red recording light reflected against the polished airport floor, while comments from people watching her live stream began filling the screen faster than she could read them. Some questioned what had happened before recording began. Others focused on the calm demeanor of the man surrounded by officers. One message appeared repeatedly. Why will nobody simply verify his identity? Grace quietly turned the phone toward Marcus again, determined to capture whatever happened next without interfering. Ethan held Marcus's boarding pass one more time before sliding it onto the inspection counter. "You keep asking me to run your name," he said. "Why?" Marcus answered with the same measured tone he had used from the beginning. "Because facts settle conversations faster than assumptions." Ethan folded his arms. "I already have enough facts." Marcus looked at him calmly. "No, you have conclusions." The distinction hung heavily in the air. Even two officers working the neighboring lane exchanged uncertain glances. They had watched the interaction for nearly 20 minutes now. Nothing about Marcus suggested aggression, deception, or urgency. If anything, he seemed more interested in observing the checkpoint than escaping it. Olivia quietly opened another internal screen and searched the authorization code manually. A secure directory immediately redirected her request to Corporate Aviation Services with one sentence highlighted in blue. "Do not delay executive arrival. Notify airline leadership immediately upon confirmation." Olivia stared at the message. Her hands grew noticeably colder. Whatever Marcus's position actually was, someone extraordinarily important expected him to arrive without interruption. She slowly looked back toward the terminal windows just as movement outside caught everyone's attention. Several airport administrators had formed a line beneath the executive entrance canopy. Their posture had changed completely. Jackets were straightened. Identification badges were adjusted. Two operations managers hurried across the sidewalk carrying tablets, while a uniformed airport director walked briskly toward the recently arrived black sport utility vehicle. Grace instinctively turned her phone toward the windows before returning to Marcus. The contrast was impossible to ignore. Extraordinary preparations were taking place only yards away while one quiet traveler continued standing at a security checkpoint waiting for someone to believe the simplest request he had made since the beginning. Marcus followed the movement outside with only a brief glance before returning his attention to Ethan. He neither smiled nor appeared surprised. It was almost as though he had expected exactly what was unfolding beyond the glass. Ethan noticed the growing activity outside but dismissed it immediately. "Looks like another executive arrived," he muttered. Marcus answered softly, "Yes, someone important is here." Ethan gave a confident smile. "Then we should not keep them waiting." Marcus looked at him with quiet understanding and replied, "I agree. They have already waited long enough." Outside the towering glass walls, The black sport utility vehicle settled quietly beneath the executive entrance canopy, as though the entire airport had been waiting for its arrival. The conversations of airport administrators stopped the moment the rear passenger door opened. A polished dress shoe touched the pavement first, followed by a tall man in a perfectly tailored navy suit. Daniel Brooks stepped out with the relaxed confidence of someone who never needed to announce his position because everyone around him already knew it. The airport director walked forward immediately, extending his hand with a welcoming smile. Two operations managers followed only a step behind, while several airline executives straightened their jackets before greeting him. Daniel acknowledged each person with a polite nod, but never slowed his pace. Instead, he asked a single question. "Has Mr. Ellison arrived?" The airport director hesitated for barely a second. "We believed he had, sir." Daniel looked toward the terminal entrance. Believed? The uncertainty in that single word caused several faces to tighten. One executive quickly checked his phone, while another contacted someone through an earpiece. Inside the terminal, Olivia Carter watched the activity unfold through the floor-to-ceiling windows. Something about the way every executive immediately focused on Daniel confirmed what the computer system had already been trying to tell her. She turned once more toward Ethan Walker. "Supervisor, I think whoever just arrived is looking for Mr. Ellison." Ethan dismissed the suggestion with a confident laugh. "Every important visitor has an escort. This has nothing to do with our checkpoint." Olivia glanced back at Marcus. He remained exactly where he had been standing, his briefcase still open on the inspection counter, his belongings neatly arranged in the gray tray beside him. His calm no longer seemed unusual. It seemed intentional. Grace Mitchell lowered her phone for the first time in nearly 20 minutes, quietly whispering to herself. He knew someone was coming. A nearby traveler overheard her and replied. Maybe that is why he never argued. Grace slowly nodded before raising her phone again. Outside, Daniel Brooks entered the terminal with several administrators following close behind. They moved quickly through the executive corridor, bypassing reception desks and private meeting rooms without stopping. Employees along the hallway greeted Daniel respectfully, but he answered only with brief nods while continuing toward the security checkpoint. His expression remained composed, although those walking beside him could sense his growing concern. Where was he last confirmed? Daniel asked. An operations manager checked a tablet. His arrival notification was triggered approximately 23 minutes ago. Daniel stopped walking for the first time. 23 minutes? The manager quietly answered. Yes, sir. Daniel resumed his pace, this time noticeably faster. Back at the checkpoint, Ethan closed Marcus's briefcase and slid it a few inches across the counter without returning it. Until I finish here, nothing leaves this station, he declared. Marcus simply looked toward the hallway leading from the executive entrance. The faintest hint of a smile appeared, not from satisfaction, but from recognition. The footsteps echoing across the polished floor were becoming louder with every passing second, and before anyone inside the checkpoint understood why, every airport administrator who had been following Daniel Brooks suddenly stopped talking altogether as they approached the final corner leading directly toward Marcus Ellison. The echo of polished dress shoes across the marble floor reached the checkpoint before anyone saw who was coming. One by one, conversations faded into silence. Airport administrators who had been walking confidently only moments earlier now stood off to the sides of the corridor, allowing Daniel Brooks to continue alone. His pace never slowed. His eyes remained fixed on the executive screening lane, where Marcus Ellison still stood beside the inspection counter with quiet patience. Ethan Walker noticed the approaching group and instinctively straightened his uniform. He assumed another executive traveler required assistance. Without looking at Marcus, he stepped forward to greet the distinguished visitor. Good morning, sir. We are handling a security situation. This area will be available in just a moment. Daniel did not answer. He continued walking. Ethan tried again. Sir. Daniel passed him without even a glance. The checkpoint became completely still. Olivia Carter lowered her hands from the keyboard. Grace Mitchell instinctively held her phone higher. Every nearby passenger watched as Daniel Brooks walked directly to Marcus Ellison and stopped only an arm's length away. For a brief second, neither man spoke. Then Daniel's serious expression softened into a genuine smile. He extended his hand. Good morning, Chairman Ellison. I am deeply sorry for keeping you waiting. Marcus accepted the handshake with the same calm composure he had maintained all morning. "Good morning, Daniel." The simplicity of the greeting struck everyone harder than a raised voice ever could. Ethan blinked once, convinced he had misunderstood what he had heard. "Chairman." The word seemed to hang in the air long after Daniel had spoken it. Several airport administrators quietly lowered their eyes. Olivia looked from Marcus to the authorization screen still glowing beside her terminal. Everything suddenly made perfect sense. Grace's recording captured the expressions of every witness as confusion gave way to realization. Daniel glanced toward the inspection counter where Marcus's belongings remained separated inside gray plastic trays. His smile disappeared. "Has Chairman Ellison been delayed here this entire time?" No one answered immediately. Daniel slowly turned toward the gathered supervisors. "I asked a question." Olivia took one careful step forward. "Approximately 25 minutes, sir." Daniel nodded once before looking back at Marcus. "Were you treated professionally?" Marcus paused for a moment. He could have answered with frustration. He could have listed every assumption that had been made about him since arriving. Instead, he spoke with remarkable restraint. "I was treated according to someone's assumptions instead of according to company standards." Daniel's expression hardened. The airport director quietly removed his glasses and lowered his head. Ethan finally found his voice. "Sir, we had reason to verify his identity." Daniel looked directly at him for the first time. "Did you verify it?" Ethan hesitated. "We were in the process." Daniel's tone remained controlled, yet every word carried unmistakable authority. "My office received an executive arrival notification 25 minutes ago. The security system issued an override. Corporate Aviation Services transmitted confirmation. Executive administration was alerted." Why was none of that enough? Ethan struggled to answer. The situation seemed unusual. Daniel calmly replied, "No. The traveler seemed unusual to you." The distinction landed with quiet force. No shouting, no insults, just a simple observation that exposed everything. Marcus remained silent, allowing the truth to unfold on its own. Daniel turned back toward him. "Chairman Ellison, the board of directors is already assembled upstairs. They have been waiting for your presentation." Marcus offered a polite nod. "They can wait another few minutes." Daniel understood immediately. This was no longer about a delayed meeting. It was about understanding exactly what had happened inside the checkpoint. Grace noticed several passengers exchanging thoughtful looks. Some lowered their phones out of respect. Others continued recording because they sensed they were witnessing something much larger than an uncomfortable misunderstanding. They were watching assumptions collapse in real time. Olivia quietly placed Marcus's wallet, phone, tablet, keys, and travel documents back into his briefcase with careful respect before closing it gently. She stepped forward and handed it to him. "I am sorry for what happened, Chairman Ellison." Marcus accepted the briefcase with a warm smile. "Thank you for choosing to pay attention to the facts." Those words stayed with Olivia more than any apology possibly could. Behind Daniel Brooks, the airport leadership stood in complete silence, waiting for whatever the chairman chose to do next. No one moved after Olivia returned the briefcase. The checkpoint had become so quiet that the distant boarding announcements sounded strangely louder than before. Daniel Brooks slowly turned away from Marcus Ellison and faced the supervisors gathered around the screening lane. His voice remained calm, but every word carried the weight of accountability. "I want every camera recording from this checkpoint preserved immediately." The airport director nodded without hesitation. "Already done, sir." Daniel continued. "No footage is to be deleted, edited, or summarized. I want the complete interaction beginning with Chairman Ellison's arrival." Ethan Walker felt the confidence that had carried him through the morning begin to disappear. Only minutes earlier he had believed he controlled the situation. Now he realized the situation had been documenting him all along. Daniel looked directly at Ethan. "Walk me through your decision." Ethan cleared his throat. His appearance did not match what we usually see in executive screening. Daniel asked quietly, "Did his boarding pass match?" Ethan hesitated. "Yes." "Did his identification match?" "Yes." "Did the verification system match?" Ethan lowered his eyes. "Yes." Daniel took one slow step closer. "Then what exactly did not match?" Ethan searched for an answer that refused to come. Around them, passengers listened without interrupting. Grace Mitchell kept recording, but even she had stopped trying to anticipate what would happen next. The silence itself had become the story. Marcus stood only a few feet away, saying nothing. He understood something many people never learned. Sometimes the truth became strongest when it was allowed to speak for itself. Daniel finally answered his own question. The only thing that did not match was your expectation of who should stand in this line. Ethan's shoulders dropped slightly. No argument remained. Olivia quietly opened the security event log on her terminal. Every action taken that morning appeared in exact order with precise timestamps. Executive arrival notification. Identity confirmation. Security override issued. Corporate liaison alert transmitted. Supervisor acknowledgement pending. She turned the monitor toward Daniel. He reviewed the entries for only a few seconds before nodding. Exactly as I expected. The airport director quietly spoke. Chairman Ellison, I sincerely apologize. Marcus looked at him with steady eyes. An apology matters only if it changes what happens tomorrow. Those words settled over everyone standing nearby. Daniel looked toward the assembled leadership team. This is why we conduct unannounced operational reviews. Policies do not fail by themselves. People choose whether to follow them. Grace noticed several travelers lowering their phones. They no longer seemed interested in capturing a dramatic confrontation. They were witnessing something more meaningful. A lesson in leadership. A young father quietly said to his daughter, "Remember this. Power does not always sound loud." She nodded thoughtfully. Nearby, an elderly woman smiled gently toward Marcus before continuing toward her departure gate. Ethan finally spoke again, this time without the certainty that had filled his voice earlier. Chairman Ellison, I made a mistake. Marcus studied him for a moment before answering. Everyone makes mistakes. The question is whether they come from incomplete information or unquestioned assumptions. Ethan could not answer. The distinction reached far beyond airport security. Daniel looked toward Olivia. Officer Carter, did you attempt to report the override? Yes, sir. 3 times. Did you follow procedure? Yes, sir. Daniel nodded with quiet approval. Thank you for doing your job. Olivia released a breath she had not realized she had been holding. Marcus turned toward her with a grateful smile. The courage to speak up rarely feels comfortable in the moment. Do not lose it. Olivia smiled back, knowing she would remember those words for the rest of her career. Daniel then faced the airport leadership once more. The board meeting can wait another few minutes. Right now, we are going to understand exactly how this happened before we discuss where this company goes next. No one objected. No one looked away. Every executive standing there understood that the most important meeting of the morning was no longer upstairs inside a conference room. It was happening right there at the security checkpoint, where assumptions had been tested against truth, and truth had quietly won. I did not come here looking for someone to blame, Marcus Ellison said quietly as he looked around the checkpoint. I came here looking for the truth. His voice never rose above a normal conversation, yet every person standing nearby seemed to hear each word with perfect clarity. Daniel Brooks folded his hands in front of him and waited. He knew Marcus well enough to understand that when the chairman spoke calmly, every sentence had already been carefully considered. Marcus turned toward Ethan Walker first. There was no anger in his expression, only disappointment. You believed you were protecting the airport, Marcus said. Protecting people is honorable. Judging people before verifying the facts is not. Ethan lowered his head. I understand that now. Marcus gave a slight nod. I hope you do, because this is bigger than one conversation. He then faced the airport director and the executive leadership gathered behind Daniel. Effective immediately, I want a complete operational review of executive screening procedures at every airport our airline serves. Every complaint involving customer profiling from the past 5 years will be reopened and reviewed independently. I do not want summaries. I want original reports, recordings, and outcomes. Several executives immediately opened their tablets and began taking notes. Daniel nodded without hesitation. It will be done. Marcus continued. Every frontline employee will complete renewed training focused on professional judgment, respectful communication, and evidence-based decision-making. Appearance is never to replace verification. Assumptions are never to replace procedure. The airport director answered immediately. We will begin organizing the program today. Marcus looked toward Olivia Carter. Officer Carter demonstrated exactly what professional responsibility looks like. She trusted policy over pressure. She spoke up repeatedly when the system indicated something was wrong. Daniel smiled. Her actions reflected our standards. Marcus nodded. Then make certain those standards are rewarded instead of overlooked. Daniel turned toward the director. Place Officer Carter's actions in today's official report as an example of procedural integrity. Olivia's eyes widened with surprise. Thank you, sir. Marcus smiled warmly. Never apologize for doing the right thing when it is difficult. He then turned once more toward Ethan. The checkpoint became completely silent again. Ethan stood motionless, waiting for whatever decision would come next. Marcus spoke carefully. Supervisor Walker, your employment status will be determined through the same review process that applies to everyone else. Fairness is not fairness if it changes depending on who is standing in front of us. Daniel acknowledged the decision with a respectful nod. Administrative leave pending investigation, effective immediately. Ethan accepted the decision without protest. For the first time that morning, he seemed to understand that accountability was not humiliation. It was responsibility. Grace Mitchell slowly lowered her phone. She realized she had recorded something few people ever witnessed. Not revenge. Not public embarrassment. Leadership. Around the checkpoint, several passengers quietly applauded. It was not loud or dramatic. It was sincere. Others simply smiled before collecting their belongings and continuing toward their gates, carrying with them a story they would likely remember for years. Marcus looked around the terminal one final time. Every traveler who walks through these doors carries a different story. Some carry backpacks. Some carry briefcases. Some carry uniforms. Some carry dreams. None of them deserve to carry someone else's prejudice. No one spoke. Even the airport announcements seemed to fade into the background for a moment. Daniel stepped beside Marcus. The board is ready whenever you are. Marcus picked up his briefcase and glanced once more toward the checkpoint where everything had begun less than an hour earlier. Nothing about the space itself had changed. The polished floors were the same. The security scanners still hummed quietly. Travelers continued arriving with tickets in their hands and destinations on their minds. Yet something invisible had changed. People who had witnessed the morning would never look at that checkpoint quite the same way again, because they had seen how easily assumptions could overpower facts and how quietly integrity could restore them. Without another word, Marcus and Daniel began walking side by side toward the executive corridor, leaving behind a checkpoint that now understood the true meaning of professional respect. Marcus Ellison and Daniel Brooks walked side by side through the executive corridor, but before they reached the private elevator, Marcus stopped and looked back through the glass wall toward the security checkpoint one last time. Travelers had already begun moving normally again. Boarding announcements echoed through the terminal. Rolling suitcases crossed polished floors. Children laughed as families hurried toward departure gates. On the surface, everything appeared exactly as it had an hour earlier. Yet Marcus understood that places rarely changed because of buildings. They changed because people chose to see each other differently. Daniel stood quietly beside him. The board can begin without us if necessary, he said. Marcus smiled faintly. The board has waited before. This moment cannot. He turned toward the airport director and several department managers who had followed them into the corridor. I want one more thing added to today's report. Every executive immediately prepared to write. Marcus continued. Beginning next month, every newly promoted supervisor across our airline will spend one full day working beside frontline employees and another full day traveling anonymously as a passenger. They will experience every line, every delay, every interaction exactly as our customers do. The airport director nodded. That will change how people lead. Marcus answered softly. That is the point. Daniel smiled in agreement. Leadership should never become so comfortable that it forgets what ordinary people experience. Grace Mitchell had remained near the checkpoint until the executives disappeared down the corridor. She finally ended her recording after nearly 40 minutes. Looking at the screen one last time, she quietly deleted the dramatic caption she had first considered posting. Instead, she typed something much simpler. Respect should never depend on appearance. She knew those words described the morning far better than outrage ever could. Across the checkpoint, Olivia Carter returned to her workstation. The monitor in front of her displayed the completed security log, but her thoughts remained on Marcus's final advice. Never apologize for doing the right thing when it is difficult. She repeated the sentence silently, committing it to memory. She realized her career would include many decisions, but from that day forward she knew exactly which standard would guide them. Ethan Walker quietly collected his personal belongings under the supervision of airport management. Before leaving, he looked once toward the executive corridor where Marcus had disappeared from view. He understood that the greatest consequence of the morning was not the investigation waiting ahead. It was recognizing how easily certainty had blinded him to facts that had been available from the very beginning. Inside the executive conference room a few minutes later, the members of the board of directors rose from their seats as Marcus entered. Daniel pulled out the chair at the head of the table, but Marcus remained standing for a moment. He looked around the room before speaking. This morning reminded me why our mission cannot stop at moving people from one city to another. We move families toward reunions. We move students toward opportunities. We move entrepreneurs toward dreams. We move veterans home. Every boarding pass represents a human story before it represents a reservation number. The room remained completely silent. Marcus continued, "If someone leaves our airport feeling smaller than when they arrived, then we have failed regardless of whether the flight departs on time." Several board members slowly nodded. No presentation slide could have communicated the company's values more clearly than the experience Marcus had just lived. He finally took his seat and placed his briefcase on the table. "Now let us discuss how we become the airline people trust, not only because we are efficient, but because we remember the dignity of every traveler." Outside, another flight lifted smoothly into the bright morning sky, carrying hundreds of passengers toward different destinations. Most would never know what had happened inside one quiet security checkpoint that day. But those who witnessed it would remember something far more lasting than a delayed screening or an unexpected meeting. They would remember that true authority did not arrive with raised voices or expensive titles. It arrived with calm conviction, unwavering integrity, and the courage to let truth speak louder than prejudice. Marcus had never needed to prove that he belonged. He simply refused to let someone else's assumptions define who belonged in the first place. He had not raised his voice that morning. He had raised the standard, and because of that choice, countless travelers who would pass through those same doors in the years ahead would be welcomed with something far more valuable than convenience. They would be welcomed with respect.